prefer to kind of just learn about these things from a distance. But when you think about, like you're saying, if you are in the field and you run into one of these, like black-eyed kids or something, it becomes this very dynamic and terrifying thing. And that's one of also the reasons I love to talk to eyewitnesses and interview them, because you get a sense pretty quick, and I'm sure you do too, having interviewed so many of them over the years, of like who's full of it and who has a genuine emotional response to what they're seeing. And being able to get these stories down, no matter how outlandish they may seem to the average person, to me is something I think is very, very important.
Well, you know, a lot of this stuff, you know, I started my first job in radio. I was supposed to be a DJ doing rock music, you know, like the Bee Gees and stuff like that back in 76. And I was hired. I went to the station to report for my day of work. The station manager goes, "Oh, no, we just changed it. We're not doing rock anymore. We're doing talk radio." Here was my first job in radio, and, you know, I was about 23, 24 years old. And he goes, "Well, do you want to do a talk show?" And I knew nothing about politics. So, you know, I started thinking, well, I kind of looked at on the news there, and they were having a problem with witchcraft and a cult in the area where people were missing and stuff like that. That got me doing paranormal back in 76. But
wow.
I will tell you one thing. You know, for years, people would talk to me about Bigfoot for various radio shows I was on. And I, you know, off the air, I'd laugh. You know, I'd say, there's no such thing as Bigfoot. People are crazy. If you got a minute, I'll tell you a little story. Back in early 2000, I got out of radio for a few years, like 16 years, because I got burned out. And I took a job managing, as a general manager, a chain of professional camera stores. And one of my customers he just got done doing his internship for being a medical doctor. And I got to know him real well. We did some short little road trips, you know, taking pictures of ghost towns and stuff like that. We got this great idea. You know, we lived in the Seattle-Tacoma area. We got this idea, we're going to go up to the Canadian Rockies, and we're going to go do, you know, old silver mines, old ghost towns. And there was an old Japanese internment camp where they interned Japanese prisoners during World War II, up middle of nowhere in the Canadian Rockies. And we drove there. And, you know, we're stupid. I mean, you can't carry any weapons with you. But we didn't even think about bear spray or anything for protection. So we had to go off a side road a few miles. And then we had to hike in through the woods. Nobody around there, you know, dumb thing to do. Around June, and there's still snow around up in there quite a bit. And we hike into this what was left of the internment camp. And my friend, you know, happened to notice, he thought he saw a huge bear across like a little creek on the side of where the mountain was, on the one side where they had the mine. And he goes, "Hey, go," you know, he had a wide angle lens on his camera. And I had a huge telephoto. There were digital cameras, you know, the first generation, you know, professional type digital cameras. And so I figured, okay, well, I'll take a picture of this bear. And I swung my camera around, and then I noticed this sucker was not a bear. You know, it was maybe 8-9 feet tall. It had a kind of a human 8 type of face. It kind of, you know, I didn't really look at it that long. But evidently, when I swung around, the light from my lens must have got its attention or whatever. And I've said this before on my show numerous times when I have people on Bigfoot talking about it. It noticed us, and it yelled the loudest scream I've ever heard in my life. And then
wow.
it proceeded to come across the creek. We took off running. And it chased us about 2.5 miles back to the car. Now, I didn't stop. Like a lot of people said, "Why didn't you take a picture?" I'll tell you something. When something that big and that terrifying, you run into it, you don't think about stopping and take their picture. Hey, can you stop there and smile? You got one instinct, and that is to get the hell out of there. And
absolutely, self-preservation all the way.
And that's what we did. And in fact, I was so scared I peed my pants. I'll say it. I was that scared. And, I'd rather been back in the military and gone through whatever I did. This scared me more than anything in my life. I did turn around once or twice during our run, and I noticed it was running between 2 legs and 4 legs.
Really?
Yeah, I can tell you the arms were way longer than a human. It definitely wasn't a bear. And the scary part is we get back to the car, and I'm getting into the car, and here it is, or its mate or companion is like 20 feet, or about 25, 30 feet away from us, bending a tree over it, maybe like a 4 or 5 inch tree over like nothing, like a bull, just bending it over, screaming at us. Okay? And the smell was it was so rancid you wanted to throw up. That's how bad the smell was. And I'm in the car. I'm starting. My friend is trying to get in the car. I'm already putting my foot down on the gas pedal, dragging him. He's half in the car, half holding onto the door. Whatever it was smart enough to be able to take a rock and throw it and put a huge dent in the fender of the car, which was really bad for me because my wife let me borrow her brand new car she bought a week before I went on our trip because she didn't think my Jeep would handle that long of a trip. I come home and my wife was all upset because, crying about her car, with a huge dent in the fender. And she kept saying, "What did you hit?" And I said, "I didn't hit nothing." And I told her what happened, and she goes, "What were you smoking or what were you drinking?" I said, I don't drink and I don't smoke. If it's not a cigar, I don't smoke it. Till this day, she doesn't believe me. But I can honestly tell you that it kind of even ruined a good friendship I had with the guy because he just started his medical practice. Now, his father was a judge for Pierce County Superior Court. His brother was a high-profile criminal attorney in Tacoma. They funded his money to open up his medical practice. And the whole trip from all the way home, because we cut our trip short. We were supposed to be gone for another week. We decided that's it. We're going home.
Understandably.
He said, "Don't ever talk about this. Maybe we shouldn't even talk to each other because I don't want this getting out because I won't have any patience because they'll think I'm crazy." But the whole thing is, I get these people that call me up, either as a guest or, as a caller, and they keep telling me that Bigfoot are warm, fuzzy, friendly little creatures. Or big creatures, unless they saw one themselves, physically saw one, they are so dead wrong. Now, it's no way you're going to find one near, a local city in a park going on a little trail. We were out in the middle of nowhere. And I tell you, it's something that I never would want to experience again. I have not gone camping. I've not been in the woods since then. You couldn't get me into a forest after that.
I can't blame you in the least. I mean, first off, that's an astonishing encounter. And at some point, I would love to pick your brain and write a proper article, but we'll save that for a later date. That absolutely is typical of a lot. I mean, an aggressive chase is not typical of all the sightings. But what I've found is that there are many more, especially on the East Coast, but even in the Pacific Northwest, territorially based encounters, and that I think that they are extremely territorial creatures, and that they are not interested in people being there, and not particularly interested in getting to know us better or nuzzling us. And there's part of the thing that I call the Harry and the Hendersons myth. People really desperately want Bigfoot and Sasquatch and all of these other hairy hominids to be like a fuzzy second cousin that kind of casts a benevolent eye towards the human race and would maybe nurture us if we got into a pinch in the woods, but otherwise avoids us. The thing is, these are 800-plus pound, 8-foot-tall predators. They're very likely omnivorous. It's probably the only way to survive in these environments. And they will pose a threat. I wrote an article for an Australian magazine some years ago. Basically, the title was "Why I Hope I Never See a Bigfoot," and in it I detailed accounts much like yours, talking about a very aggressive stance these things can take. At the very least, even if they're not openly dangerously predatory towards people, they are large wild animals, and that always can prove to be dangerous. So if there's one thing I try to do, much like you do, is disabuse people of the notion that these are the gentle giants of mythology. That makes for a fun Olympic mascot, that makes for a fun children's book, but it's not very likely, it is absolutely not the reality of this creature.
Well, too, my daughter, through a couple marriages, married into, and had a couple kids from two different Indian tribes. Now, I'm not Indian, but one of the tribes I'll mention was Muckleshoot up here in Tacoma, Pierce County area. And I got to know the medicine woman, and I asked her questions about Bigfoot. And she started going back, going around the 1800s and stuff like that. What she told me is that the encounter with Bigfoot is not like what people talk about today. They would be, for example, the squaw would be down at the river, right, washing clothes or whatever they're doing, and they would have their, babies with them, right? And they had reports, well, not reports, but she claimed that the Bigfoots would come in, grab the squaws or grab the babies, and take them away. And then a day or two later, they're out trying to, find their spouse, their a squaw or their children that went missing, and then they find bones.
Absolutely, I've heard some of the same accounts from Native Americans I've spoken to, and in Canada there is a strip, and on the West Coast, a strip of road that is notorious for female hitchhikers, which of course it's a dangerous pastime anyway. I wouldn't recommend it to anyone of any gender, but especially a woman, disappearing, and the natives up there insist that it is Bigfoot, it is Sasquatch, it is these hairy creatures taking them, using them for purposes that I won't talk about on a family-friendly radio show, and then consuming them. This kind of 1-2 punch of a horrific, nightmarish way to end your life, and it's kind of like a well-kept secret, but that's open to those that are familiar with the lore of the area. I'm actually working on an article about it pretty soon. It's really fascinating and utterly horrifying. Again, there's not a lot of evidence to suggest that these things have a particular fondness for human beings. I'm not saying that they're actively hunting us down and that we're like their ultimate delicacy. I think for the most part they want to avoid anything that smells like gunpowder, tobacco, and the kind of dangerous elements that we're usually bring with us to the woods. But I don't think they understand that they're the alpha predator in the environment they live in. And if we get too close, kind of like your encounter, it can be a scare-away tactic, but it can go much further.
Well, I honestly think if I would have been just by myself and not had a friend with me, I don't think I would have made it back to the car. That's just my feeling I really had. I think at that point it probably would have just picked me off. But I think the only reason why I didn't have that problem because I had somebody with me. And, we were screaming and running, and, I think maybe that's what saved us. I think if the car would have been farther away, I don't know if we would have even made it back to the car. And, one of my listeners, I don't know if you ever heard of Ed Romans, but in
I'm afraid not.
Canada, he's like one of the number one folk singers in Canada. I mean, if you go in Canada and you mention Ed Romans, everybody knows who he is if you're into folk music. And he heard my show, and he had his agent get a hold of me, and he wanted to be on my show, and he wanted to explain his encounter with a Bigfoot. Now, his encounter, Rob, was he lived out in the country in British Columbia, and the thing is that he would go for walks with his dog. Now, he would have to drive to an area, and there was kind of a wooded area, out in the forest, and there was a small trail, and him and his dog would go walking down this trail. Well, one day he was walking down this trail, and he said about 1,000 feet, 1,000 yards, I can't remember what he said, there was same thing